Welcome to Fish University, your one-stop shop for the science behind fish management. It is part of the Natural Resources University Podcast Network. I'm Wes Neal, your host. I'm an extension professor of fisheries and a researcher for Mississippi State University. Join me as I talk to researchers, managers, and landowners about the tools and science and the tricks of the trade for managing fish, water, and habitat. The goal is for you to have better fishing and a healthier aquatic ecosystem. So grab a notebook and the beverage of your choice and relax and enjoy Fish University. Welcome back to Fish University. If you're an avid watcher of the Sci-Fi Channel, you've surely seen promotions for their made-for-TV movies on killer fish. Whether it is a mutant snakehead or one from space, movies like Snakehead Terror and Snakehead Swamp turn the genus of fish into a nightmare that even the most ardent fish lover would want to wake from. Like all invasive species, when snakeheads do show up here in North American waters, and they do, there can be consequences. However, your children are probably safe. On today's episode, our guest is an expert on snakehead invasions in the United States and has been working with this species since one of their earliest invasions and detections on the East Coast. John Odenkirk is a fisheries biologist with the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, where he's worked for, well, as long as I've known you, and that's been a couple decades. So I don't know, how long have you been there? Hi, John. How are you doing?
Hey, Wes, good to see you, buddy.
How long have you been with the PDWR?
Well, yeah, I've got the old shirt on. I've been there long enough. We've had three different names. When I came on, we were the Commission of Game and Inland Fisheries, and then we became the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, and just recently, we became the Department of Wildlife Resources. Because even though we still get all our funding from sportsmen, hunters, and fishermen, we're responsible for all wildlife in the state. And most of that stuff's not hunted or fished for, and so I guess we thought it was a better, although we didn't even know they were changing our name, so they told us the name was changed. But, you know, it does reflect our agency's mission better. Problem is we had a little bit of identity crisis anyway, so we changed our name three times I came back from Florida in 1989. So I've been here a while, longer than I care to admit, because time is going by so damn fast, I just can't even recognize it. But anyway, it is what it is, and so I'm along for just a great ride.
So I like to start off usually by having my guests tell the listeners a little bit about where you come from and how you got into fish and fisheries management. So tell us your story.
Well, I was sort of a wayward undergrad, wandering my way through the College of Wildlife and Forestry Resources at Virginia Tech. And I was in pre-forestry. I didn't even really know what pre-forestry was. And between the sophomore and junior years, when you had to start, identifying on your true major and taking the classes that were more specialized, we had to go through a little seminar and look at the different options available. And at that point, there were 8 or 10 different options in wildlife and forestry resources. And I started looking at these presentations about the different, specialties, if you will. And then this thing, fisheries, came up. And I never even heard of that. I mean, I was in pre-forestry, so we're all taking biology, chemistry, whatever. And I'm looking at this show about fisheries, and I'm thinking, that's what I want to do. That's perfect. I didn't know you could make a living doing this. I still can't. And so I jumped into fisheries my junior year at Tech. And that, it took me a little longer to get my undergrad. And I worked for the Game Commission part-time when I was finishing up at Tech. And both John Ney and Don Orth, two professors and one of my advisors, Don Orth just retired. Unbelievable. He's been there that whole ride. It's just crazy. But between those two gentlemen and my boss at the time, David Whitehurst, pushed me to go to graduate school. It's probably one of the best things I ever did. I ended up going to Tennessee Tech, went to graduate school, got a degree in fisheries. And then my boss there, or my advisor there, Don Estes, rolled me right into a thing down in Florida where he was a buddy with a guy named Jim Barkley running a laboratory in Panama City working on sturgeon and stripers. So I went straight out of graduate school down to on a career ladder to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I mean, a cakewalk for anybody in our profession. And at that time, I had just gotten married. And so I dragged my wife from Virginia. It's all she'd ever known. Her whole life was Virginia, all her friends, all her family, school here. I took her straight down to Panama City Beach. We lived on the Redneck Riviera. Fishing was great. My work was great, but she was about to kill herself. So she made it almost 3 years, and I put in for a transfer. They couldn't get me transferred in time before she was going to jump off the ledge. So I put in for my old agency, Department of Game and Fish, and they offered me a position. So I resigned my post from the feds and came back to Virginia, and I'm still in that post that I left Florida for in August of '89. It's essentially just managing a district in Northern Virginia.
So, what are your typical job responsibilities entail? What all do you work with?
Well, Virginia is similar to many state game and fish agencies. We don't have a separate research and management arm like some do. We've got more of a generic regional and district boundary setup. So if you're in my position, I'm just a fisheries biologist, a district biologist, if you will, a fisheries biologist, and you manage the waters in your district. So I've got 12 counties of water in north central Virginia, and whether it's a smallmouth river, a big nuclear cooling water reservoir, trout streams coming off the Skyline Drive, tidal water, I have all that. And so that's what's pretty cool about my district is one day I'll be up in the mountains working with brook trout, and the next day I'll be down in the estuary with striped bass or something like that. So it's you just truly manage the waters in your district.
So a lot of what you work with is sport fish management for angling.
Yep.
But you also do quite a bit of work with invasive species, and there's one invasive species that we're talking about today that has shown up. I guess it showed up in Maryland originally, but it quickly got into Virginia waters. So let's talk a little bit about the Northern Snakehead and the history of how the Northern Snakehead arrived to the U.S. and from that first detection and on.
Well, there were some crazy years back then. You mentioned those movies kind of in the intro. So preface, 2002, there was an incident in Crofton, Maryland, with a stormwater pond where a gentleman, I believe it was determined that this person had bought some northern snakeheads from a market because they have purported medicinal or healing properties, especially in the Asian culture. And I believe this gentleman might have been Asian or his wife was Asian, and she was ill. And he was convinced that if he bought these snakeheads and made soup or cooked them or however he was going to do it, that, it would help her get better. Well, I guess between the time he bought the snakeheads and before she was going to eat them, she got better. And so this guy just says, well, I don't want to kill these fish now. I mean, I'm just going to let them go in this pond, which happens all the time. And I work in a lot of urban areas. People release pacus, piranhas, tilapia. I mean, we find all kinds of stuff in water bodies in urban areas just because of concentrated population. You got a lot of stuff going on. And people don't want to kill something that these are a pet or they got for some other reason. They just, reluctant to kill things, which is probably a good thing, I guess. But we just don't want people dumping fish out either. So anyway, this gentleman put these fish in this stormwater pond in Crofton in 2002. And I don't think there were probably many other fish in there, if at all. A lot of times stormwater ponds are, they're just, there's not a lot going on there. They inundate with season, so they're not always watered fully anyway. But the snakehead population prospered. They don't really need a lot of water anyway. And so somebody figured out they were there, and the alarm goes off. Maryland said, holy crap. They went out. Yep, they're here. And they nuked the pond with rotenone, which is weird that rotenone kills snakeheads because they don't get their oxygen through water. They breathe. They're obligate air breathers. So it's still odd to me that rotenone kills snakeheads. But anyway, it does. And they killed all the fish in that pond. And they said, okay, they claimed victory. And they said, we got rid of this population before they got into the tidal Potomac River. And actually, I think they did. And so then about that time, the movie started. The late night comedians started making jokes about snakeheads and comic book strips. And it just sort of became a phenomenon, sort of a cultural thing with, snakehead this, terror, whatever. And then the next year, another stormwater pond in Maryland, this time it was in Wheaton, had a similar situation and took care of those. And another year goes by. In May of 2004, I'm sitting in my office in Fredericksburg on a Friday afternoon, and an angler calls me up that's pre-fishing. The Potomac River is one of the best bass fisheries on the East Coast, the tidal Potomac freshwater below D.C., amazing largemouth bass fishery. It's a ton of tournaments up there. So this was in May, and this guy calls me up, and he says, I caught a snakehead in the Potomac River. And we've been getting oodles of snakehead calls. I mean, all the time. We created a poster because people were killing bowfin and eels and walleye and darters and all kinds of stuff. Oh, this is a snakehead, kill. So we're trying to get people educated, put these signs up, put it on the internet. And so this guy says, I caught a snakehead. And I've already had, at this point, 50, 60, 70 of these calls. I said, I don't think you caught a snakehead. He said, man, because I fish a lot in South Florida. I've caught the bullseye. And of course, we'll talk about that later. Not called bullseyes anymore down there. But he convinced me that he knew what a snake. He goes, I know it's not an eel. I know it's not a bowfin. I know my fish. I'm telling you. And this was 2004. Not everybody had, could text me a picture, right? So I had to get on 95 in rush hour traffic, drive to the hotel where he was staying for his bass tournament. And I walk out in the parking lot, and him and a bunch of his buddies were sitting around their boats, and he had it in a cooler, and he pushed it out and looks at me. I said, holy crap. I said, yeah, you do have one, buddy. He said, I told you I had one. So I called Gary Martell right there from the parking lot. I did have his antiquated cell phone and car phone. And I said, Gary, I said, at first I asked the guy, I said, show me exactly where you caught it on this map. And I had a chart of the tidal Potomac. And he points to Little Hunting Creek, which is a Virginia tributary. Because if it was in Maryland, I mean, the systems are connected, right? But if it's Maryland, which most of the Potomac River is Maryland, I'm sort of like, that's Maryland's problem. They're going to have to deal with that. But it was in Virginia water, in Little Hunting Creek, which is a tidal Virginia tributary of the Potomac River. So I called Gary and I said, yeah, we got a situation. We got a snakehead caught here in Virginia waters. So then for the next 2 years, it was just chaos. I mean, like everything went upside down. We were initially told that they couldn't be captured electrofishing. So you had to use nets to investigate, to try to, because of course we're wondering, was this the only one? Probably not. So how many are there? What's the distribution? What's the age structure, size structure, all that things we want to know as fisheries professionals, what's going on. And so we just started it was off the hook. Overnight, it was stories, national and local stories about snakeheads. And we're getting constant calls by reporters. We didn't make a trip out in the field. It was 2 to 3 years before we didn't have a crew with us every time we went out. 2-person, 3-person crew from one of the local news stations or Fox News or you name it. I mean, everybody was interested in what was going on. And Fish and Wildlife Service got involved. Maryland got involved, DC Fisheries, Virginia. So it was really just a totally chaotic time. And there was nothing. The thing you got to realize is there's not actually a whole lot of literature now, 20 plus years into it. But back then, there was almost nothing in the peer-reviewed literature about northern snakeheads or any snakeheads and their impacts or their life history, behaviors, any of that stuff. And so I started reaching out mostly by phone to people in other states and sometimes other countries asking questions. And there was a guy in Japan who was very helpful. And he was fluent in Cantonese and some other Asian dialects, Chinese dialect primarily. He would send me papers with abstracts, some of them translated in English, and some of them he would very kindly translate for me. And so I developed a file over 6 or 8 months of a lot of these papers from around the world dealing with snakeheads, trying to learn a little bit more about them. And so we set about on a path to figure out how many there were, and of course, an angler once in a while through the course of 2004, all this has happened in 2004, would turn 1 or 2 in, here and there. But at the end of 2004, we ended up with exactly 20 fish. And that was that first paper that we wrote, Steve Owens and I, basically just putting it out there. Hey, we've got a reproducing population of snakeheads in the tidal Potomac system. The N equals 20. These were 20 fish that were collected by everything, by us shocking, the Fed shocking, Maryland shocking, anglers turning fish in, all that combined to those 20 fish at baseline. We had the genetic survey by Tom Morrell done on that. He pinned it down to a single introduction of a very small number of individuals. In other words, they hadn't branched out a lot. There wasn't a lot of genetic diversity in the samples that he was looking at. And so it indicated like a founder stock, just a small group of fish. And they were genetically distinct from both the Crofton and Wheaton fish. So it was a separate introduction that probably happened around Fort Belvoir. Route 1 corridor is right there along Fort Belvoir. We've never had anybody step forward and say, deathbed confession, I'm the one that put him in the tidal Potomac. Probably never will have. But it's, there's a lot of Asian restaurants on that stretch. There's a high degree of fluctuation of people from around the world with the Fort Belvoir military installation there. And so it's not a hard stretch to think that if Doe Creek is one of those creeks in that area, that was the epicenter. Like if you looked at the original distribution of those 20 fish, there was, like a bullseye around Doe Creek where Fort Belvoir is, and Route 1 comes right down through there. And then they went out from there. That was our introduction to it. And essentially, because it was in my district, it just fell in my lap. Like they say, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. And so life gave me snakeheads. And so I said, well, I'm going to figure out snakeheads. And so I set about to do the best I could while still doing my regular job, which is managing other waters in these 12 counties, and then just throw snakeheads into the mix. So, gee, what a fun time.
I remember those times when they first discovered them and all those movies were coming out. And shortly after that, people began to make predictions about the impact that snakeheads were going to have on these ecosystems. And they were pretty dire. I mean, they were predicting, complete community collapses and stuff. That really didn't come true, did it?
It hasn't yet. And personally, I don't think it will come true. I don't. Our biggest fear is if this fish gets into perfect habitat for it, like a blackwater coastal plain system, swampy system where we might have an endangered species like a black-banded sunfish. They do tend to prey on centrarchids a lot. I think it's a habitat thing. So that's our primary fear. But in terms of, you're right. I mean, early on, people said they were going to destroy the bass fishery in the tidal Potomac system, which would be a catastrophe from a commercial and recreational standpoint, because it's just a cash cow for a lot of people, and it's important, from a recreational standpoint. But so one of the things I mentioned when I started calling around, I wanted to know where snakeheads been, where they're not native. And there weren't a lot of options, even then or even now, really. I mean, we've got more here in the U.S. and more people are looking. But I was looking at a timeline sort of thing, it's a temporal scale. And so I called down in Florida. They'd been established there just a few years earlier, I think around 2000, but they've been there for a few years. So I called down to Paul Shaflin, who's retired now, but he was worked down in South Florida Water Management District. And I asked him, I said, what's going on with those bullseyes you got down there? You have any problems with them? He's like, no, man, we can't even find them. I'm like, really? He said, yeah, they're really scarce. People want to catch them, and they go out, and they can't even find them. I was like, that's interesting. All right. So I called this woman named Annette Tagawa, who actually gave a presentation at our Snakehead Symposium that we hosted in the first international Snakehead Symposium in Alexandria, Virginia, a few years back. Annette came there and gave a real nice presentation. But I asked her back in 2004. I said, well, you all have had snakeheads, and not the northern snakehead. It was blotched, different species, but the same genus, and essentially the same behaviors and life history. You just can't tolerate the colder temperatures. But other than that, it's pretty similar fish. And I said, we've had them out there for about 100 years. I said, what? Of course, Hawaii's got problems with a lot of non-native or invasive organisms, whether it's a goat or whatever. And I said, what's going on with the snakeheads out there you've got? And she says, man, we don't have enough. I said, what? Excuse me? What'd you say? We don't have enough? I thought that was odd. And she says, well, everybody loves them. They're really good to eat, and we don't have any. They're gone. And I was like, wow, this is not what I was expecting. And then the gentleman that had got me all that literature from Japan, he put me in touch with a manager who also came to our Snakehead Symposium that was working on Lake Biwa in Japan. And northern snakeheads weren't native to Japan. They're native to much of Asia, but not Japan. But they'd been established in Lake Biwa for a better part of 100 years. And they'd become like largemouth to us, at least in the Chesapeake Bay region of Virginia. Largemouth and smallmouth aren't native here, but everybody thinks they're native because they've been here for over 100 years and everybody loves them. So they're just sort of considered, from here. And that's the way that northern snakeheads were in Lake Biwa, Japan. And Katsuki Nakai, he told me, he said, yeah, some jerk put largemouth bass in our lake and they're going to destroy the snakeheads. This is not what I was expecting to hear at all from talking to these people where snakeheads have been established. And after doing sort of this work, I wasn't overly as concerned as I initially was. The snakeheads were going to be the terror. But nobody else, was kind of doing what I'm doing, so everybody else is still kind of freaked out. So we're getting phone calls at our office where people are afraid to go near the water's edge. I'm not joking. People were genuinely fearful of either themselves swimming, their dog swimming in a pond. One of the first places we got to sample juvenile, young year snakeheads, and we actually tried to mark them with OTC, oxytetracycline, which is staining their otoliths or their ear bones so we can validate our aging techniques, which is something we needed to do since nobody had ever looked at an otolith of a northern snakehead that I could tell. And so we were looking for a colony or a year class of juvenile snakeheads to try this immersion technique with OTC. And we put it out there that, hey, please, if you find a nest or if you see a parent with young, call us. And we got some calls. And one of the calls was from a guy that ran Mount Vernon Country Club. He was the golf course manager. And he called me up and he says, man, I'm sure glad I got a hold of you guys. You come out, we got a nest out here. I got snakeheads everywhere. And so we go out and sure enough, you can see both parents' garden. Got a real nice picture of this group, this ball of fry. And he says, can you get rid of those big ones so I can let my dog swim in the pond again? I said, you can let your dog swim in the pond, man. Fish aren't going to hurt your dog. And he had it was like a pit bull. That's the level of misinformation and hysteria we were dealing with. And it lasted for years. It got a little better, 05, 06, 07. But even to this day, we still get an occasional person where they're just really wigged out about snakeheads, going after them. One of the reporters I had out with me probably the second year, she's interviewing me as we're working up fish. And she kept asking me, how many times have you been attacked? I said, I've never been attacked. What do you mean attacked? Well, how many times have you been bitten? I said, I've never been bitten. I said, bluefish, if you go saltwater fishing and you catch a bluefish, that fish's eyes looks at your finger and it'll lunge for your finger. That's a vindictive fish. I said, snakeheads, they're pretty lazy. That's not the spot she was looking for on the news, but that's what I've always tried to do. Sometimes I get in a little bit of hot water because I just try to keep it real. I'm not a proponent for snakeheads. I'm not against snakeheads. I'm doing my best to evaluate what they're doing and how everything is responding to them and how they're responding to everything else. So that's what I try to put out there, just reality. And sometimes that gets me in trouble.
Yeah, and you mentioned that they're very good to eat. If you have never had snakehead, if you've ever traveled to Southeast Asia, you've almost certainly eaten snakehead. Probably not the same species, but you've eaten snakehead. I've had some of we'll get to Arkansas in a little bit, but I've had some of the Arkansas fish. I mean, it's a totally different experience than eating a fish fillet. It's dense meat that's almost like chicken breast. It'll take any flavor. It's got no fishy flavor. You can understand why it's so valuable as a food fish and why it gets moved around a lot, because it is a really good fish to eat. But one of the things I wanted to ask is, we kind of dispelled the idea that they're going to destroy all ecosystems a number of years ago. But still, one of the concerns I hear expressed to me, even by fisheries people, is the concern about how they might affect one fish in particular, which is the bowfin, because they have very similar life histories and very similar habitats. Have you noticed any effect on bowfin from snakeheads?
No, haven't yet. Now, we're only looking at one river. Because basically they've only been colonized in one river where we have bowfin at this point. The Jenkins and Burkhead and Fishes of Virginia, sort of the Bible of Virginia fish knowledge, they claim that bowfin are native in the Potomac drainage. I've never seen one in the Potomac drainage. I'm sure they're native to the Potomac drainage, but I've never seen one. However, if you just go a little bit further south, down 95, you come across the Rappahannock River around Fredericksburg, and the Rappahannock River is loaded with bowfin. Well, it just so happens snakeheads didn't colonize the Rappahannock till 2012. So 12 years after they colonized, right? 8 years after, sorry. About a decade later, leave it at that. When the S hit the fan in 2004, and everyone was concerned about the tidal bass fishery in the Potomac, we didn't really have data on that bass fishery. We had a little bit, but no comprehensive data that would be any statistically valid sort of sequence to make a determination on what the population was doing. And that was simply because at that point in time, we're going back almost 20 years ago, we were spending most of our time on reservoirs. We weren't doing a ton of tidal river work. If we were on rivers, we were on like smallmouth rivers, non-tidal sections. And the other fact is that Maryland owns right up to the Virginia shoreline of the tidal Potomac system. So basically, Maryland was managing that fishery. We have major tributaries that are very important, but again, we weren't spending that much time on them until 2004. Now, when 2004 happened, we started collecting annual data for, since 2004 to last year on Virginia tributaries in the Potomac. Well, about the same time that the snakehead showed up on the Potomac, we had a terrible string of year classes on largemouth bass in the Rappahannock system. And the tournament anglers and fishermen were screaming bloody murder. So we went out and we started developing a database on the largemouth bass population in the Rappahannock. And this was in 2003. We actually started that in 2003. And snakeheads didn't show up for almost 10 years later. not only were we collecting largemouth bass on the tidal Rappahannock, we were collecting smallmouth when we found them and bowfin, which are very abundant in the tidal Rappahannock. So we had 10 years of data on bowfin abundance and size structure before snakehead showed up. Now, what happened when snakehead showed up on the Rappahannock in about 2012, they percolated for a little while. They didn't shoot straight up like they did on the Potomac, or not as fast as they did on the Potomac. And I think part of that is, number one, the habitat's completely different and the productivity is less on the Rappahannock. It's a less productive system, it's a smaller system, and there's not a lot of aquatic vegetation in the tidal Rappahannock like there is in the tidal Potomac. So I think the combination of factors sort of kept the lid on the snakeheads before they started expanding. But what we also started to see was this largemouth bass population. We didn't stock any fish in the section of the tidal Rappahannock where I'm talking about, but we knew we had good year classes coming. Mother Nature was giving us good year classes. Anglers didn't want to wait. They wanted us to stock fish. We said, wait, you're going to get some fish. Fish started coming down the pipeline because we had some great year classes. We started looking at the largemouth bass abundance increasing. We started looking at bowfin abundance increasing, and then finally snakeheads took off. So I gave this paper a few years ago at a Southern Division meeting, and you could overlay the regression trends of these three different populations, all the same niche, essentially, all top trophic predators in the system. Bowfin, largemouth bass, and northern snakehead, all three are significantly going up. Also about this time, now we're not quantifying aquatic vegetation presence in the system. We just don't have the means at the time to do it. But I can tell you for sure, we've got more grass in that system than I've ever seen in 30 years. Main stem grass. Used to be you could only find grass in the tributaries. Now there's grass, not just hydrilla, but native grasses in the main stem. And that started beginning about 5 or 6 years ago. So I think it's one of these theorems, like when it's good, it's good. When it's good for you, it's good for everybody. So they're all benefiting from the increased habitat. So we saw the bowfin numbers increase, the snakehead numbers increase, and the bass numbers increase all together, I think, with the context of solid reproduction and good habitat. So to get back to your original question about snakehead impacts on bowfin, based on that, you'd have to say at this point, it doesn't look like it. I think what it comes back down to is the absolute, where do snakeheads peak out, right? Because they're the newcomer here. The bass, okay, despite the variable year classes from recruitment, things have been kind of sorted out for years for bass and bowfin, where snakeheads are new. So I think what we saw in the Potomac system was it takes about 15 to 20 years for this individual, this novel predator, to run its course based on its life history. If you looked at a blue catfish, it's going to be different. It gets much larger, it lives much longer. But I think when you look at the parameters of northern snakehead, maximum lifespan, maximum size, growth rate, I think what you're going to see is the abundance level is going to be peaking somewhere in the 15 to 20 year range. So I think in the Potomac, we've seen what they can do. Their numbers all peaked in all the creeks. We have 4 creeks that we've been studying since 2004. And all 4 of those creeks, even the one that was colonized a few years later, and it peaked a year or two later than the others, probably not coincidentally, all about 15 or 16 years post-introduction. And we're guessing the post-introduction in the Potomac was around 2000. We found them in 2004, but the age distribution suggested probably around 2000. So it took around 15, give or take a few years, for that population to, I think, hit to show us what it can do. And I would expect it would be the same in most other systems. And then the other thing about that is the exploitation. So I think there's 2 factors going on. You've got assimilation, right? People say there's no natural predators. That is a load of bunk. I mean, everything wants to eat these fish, especially when they're young. And they are eating these fish when they're young. The ecosystem it finds itself in has figured it out, and it's getting the hell exploited out of it. As we've already mentioned, they're great food. They're legal for commercial sale in most of the jurisdictions around here. The fishermen are getting like $6 a pound whole fish. And the fillets, last time I checked, were selling for between $15 and $20 a pound, sometimes even a little more. I mean, you're getting to the price at Whole Foods where they're commensurate with fresh grouper or a red snapper, something like that. I mean, so the financial incentive, and you can legally, there's no limit on it. There's no size limit, no bag limit. You can go out at night with bow and arrow, like gig and flounder, and it's just like shooting ducks in a barrel. These guys come in and they'll have 20, 30 snakes in the boat, take them over and sell them. That's a good night. So you've got the double whammy. You've got the assimilation sort of, and you got the exploitation. And we documented that. Josh Newhart was a primary author of a paper we had at the symposium on the exploitation factor. We up around 50% on some of these populations. So they're just getting hammered. And so that, those two things I think are going to suppress those and probably allow that bowfin population to remain prosperous in the face of some good habitat.
I'm not going to be able to get you to go on record like Hawaii and say you need more of them, right?
No, I can't say that. Although our anglers are saying that.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we have a biennial regulation cycle where we solicit public comment from our anglers on what they want to see and on anything. And we're coming up on a new cycle now. So what I'm telling you is almost a year and a half old. That last cycle, we had more comments on Northern Snakehead than any other fish in the state. 100% of those comments were conservation oriented. Our anglers want people to quit stealing all the fish. These archery people are taking too many. There needs to be a size limit. There needs to be a bag limit. That's what we're hearing from our anglers. And this agency has two jobs. Number one is conservation, and number two is recreation, catering to our constituents who are anglers. If all our anglers want snakeheads, so right now we're still walking the tightrope because there could be a downside that we haven't seen yet. So we're still cautious, but at the same time, it's going to be hard to maintain this position indefinitely.
And you mentioned the Rappahannock. These fish have been moving both north and south. I forget the last time I saw it. I know that they went quite a ways north, and I'm not sure if they made it down out of south of Virginia yet. But how are they moving? Are they saltwater tolerant? Are they moving through the estuaries, or how are they getting around? Or are they being moved by anglers?
All of the above. Yeah, that's a great question. And all of the above, absolutely. So these fish are made to travel multiple ways. Number one, they're resilient. They're really tough. They're excellent athletes. They're good migrants. Although our telemetry studies and everything we've been able to discern about the behaviors is generally they're a very sedentary fish. They're lazy. Equate them to a flounder, a vertical thrust predator. It doesn't want to move much. It's going to lay there. And when something swims in front of its yap, it doesn't matter what it is. If it's hungry, it's going to inhale it and go back to its rest. We'll see a fish under the same dock for years and venturing very minimal distance in terms of a home range. We've done a lot of work with that over the years. Their exception to that are, I guess, is twofold. Number one, Nick LaPlante was a PhD student, worked with Virginia Tech, and spent a lot of time with me over the years. Did a better radio telemetry. I think I was the first one to ever put a transmitter in a snakehead, and Nick did it a lot more and probably a lot better. His theory, and I agree with it, it almost seems like there's some innate programming that a certain percentage of individuals from a population will want to disperse. And this happens in mid-April, pre-spawn. They generally spawn in early June, but once the water warms and they've been on the feed for a while, it seems like a certain percentage of fish want to migrate upstream. And this seems to me unusual because we're in a tidal system, right? You have upstream and downstream twice a day each way. It's like, why do we always go upstream? I mean, we have documented occasionally a tag fish will show up below where it was tagged, but mostly, way more fish go upstream. And so, and they will fight hard to get upstream. They're really good athletes. They can jump, we talk about passing fish. There are low scenes, our shad and herring, our migratory fish that need to get up to spawn in their natal rivers, or dams were built and they blocked their spawning habitat. Well, snakeheads they're not as good as eels at crawling around dams, but in terms of jumping over obstacles, they're really, really good. And the fact that they can breathe air, they can go through some systems that maybe have poor oxygen and other things to allow them a better adaptation to survive different circumstances. So anyway, number one, they're really good at moving upstream in this pre-spawn spring thing. Then the other time that they seem really good at moving on their own is when we get these freshets. And again, we're in a tidal freshwater system, at least initially we were. And so a lot of our work was focused on this. Earlier beliefs were not entirely correct. This is often the case in that they couldn't tolerate a high degree of salinity. The Fish and Wildlife Service, Steve Minkinen over there in Annapolis and Josh, they did some tests at some hatcheries, some trials, and they were able to get juveniles especially up to pretty brackish water. We're talking, full strength seawater around here is about 35, 37 parts per thousand. They were getting juveniles routinely up into 12, 14 parts per thousand. So that's very brackish water, like river mouth of the bay type thing. And we've had people arrow them out with cow nose rays in the bay proper. Bottom line is, when we get these freshets, it's typically fall, hurricane, tropical storm type moisture, and we have major flushing of our riverbed or watershed. And you get this, salt water is more dense than fresh water. So you get these big freshets going down towards the bay. The snakeheads look like they're riding these freshets down towards the bay and even into the bay in some cases. That's, I think, how they got on the eastern shore. And then as the salinity, starts to increase, as those floodwaters recede, salinity begins to get higher. Those fish seek out the little tributaries, wherever they are, wherever the feeder is, they go up in that tributary to get some fresher water, and they work their way up that tributary. So I think through that method, they were successful in colonizing a lot of the lower Potomac River, and possibly how they even got into the lower end of the Rappahannock at about the same time they were illegally stocked into a reservoir in the very upper part of the Rappahannock watershed called Ruffin's Mill Pond on Massaponax Creek. So in that way, the Rappahannock was taken by storm by two different mechanisms. Both of those mechanisms, for terms of snakehead dispersal, are viable options that they use very well to increase their range. Then the other way they're increasing their range is in the trunks of people's cars or in the beds of their trucks, because as obligate air breathers, as long as they're kept moist, they're very, very easy to transport. And as you mentioned, there's an incentive for people to move them because people like them, because they're good to eat, they're fun to catch. If you drew up the attributes of a good sport and food fish, you'd be hard pressed to pick a better fish for all those different attributes. It's a violation of a lot of different laws, federal and state, to move these fish. And we even increased it to a class 1 misdemeanor. The only one we ever prosecuted was before we did that. It was a class 3 at that time. We did prosecute one individual for illegally stocking snakeheads. Even as a class 1 misdemeanor, it's still not a big enough incentive for people not to move them. And so that's how they got up, into Jersey and Delaware and Pennsylvania. There's just a pipeline of people running fish up and down 95, putting them in their favorite water.
Sounds an awful lot like our wild pig problem.
Exactly, yeah.
The East Coast is not the only place that has a northern snakehead population established. About the time I left Arkansas, one began to show up in Arkansas, where in that case it was a private fish farmer brought northern snakeheads in as a possible aquaculture species, and with permission. I mean, it wasn't illegal at the time, but that was rethought. They said, you know what, we shouldn't do this, and they decided to destroy the fish. But they were too late, because one thing about snakeheads, as you said, they're an obligate air breather. As long as they're moist, they're okay. So they can wiggle across land when they need to. And these fish, we had a good heavy rain, and those fish found their way out of the pond and into a local creek. And before long, they were established in Arkansas. I think Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, I think they spent upwards over $1 million to poison out the stream, trying to kill everything and start over again, and weren't successful. So last I heard, I think these fish are now in Missouri. I know just this year they found one in Louisiana. Mississippi, we've got some here as well. Probably Tennessee, but I can't confirm that. So, there's another population that's doing almost exactly the same thing as what they did on the East Coast, but on the Mississippi River side of things, no salinity at all to deal with. And I think, if I recall, I think there is a population of northern snakeheads in Florida as well, in addition to the other species they have down there. Anytime you take a fish that can survive in an area and release it, you're going to create problems. And the world's full of examples of invasive species where somebody with good intentions, usually, I have this fish in my aquarium and it's gotten too big for the aquarium, so I'm going to let it go. Or bad intentions, I like to eat this fish, so I'm going to stock this fish into my local waterway where I can catch it more often. Has consequences that they can't even possibly imagine a lot of times.
Right.
So, as you said, don't move fish around. Moving anything around that doesn't belong is a bad idea. It's usually against the law. I know that snakeheads have now been found in North Carolina, and that had to have been somebody moved it there, I think in the mountains of North Carolina. There's been at least one record in Lake Michigan. I don't know if they'll be able to establish populations there, if it's too cold or anything, and even California, they've shown up in California. So these fish have certainly been moved around a lot since that first discovery over in your neck of the woods. Of course, northern snakeheads are just one of 50 species of snakeheads. The genus is the Channa genus. Northern snakeheads are Channa argus, but there's about 50 species of Channa out there in the world, all native to Asia. Southeast Asia has a whole lot of different tropical species that probably won't establish anywhere but Florida or Hawaii. But I don't know, are there other, similar to the northern snakehead, are there any other temperate species that could establish?
I don't believe so, Wes. I think the northern is the only one that could take over essentially the continental United States and even Canada. And honestly, I thought it probably would have pressed further west by now. And even in Virginia, we still have a lot of drainages in Virginia where we don't have it. So it hasn't progressed as fast, as rapidly as I thought it would. But there's no question it will eventually.
They're kind of a habitat specialist. They like slow moving, shallow, vegetated waters. So, the likelihood of them moving up into the upper Potomac, Jackson River, or some of these headwaters, streams that are mostly runs and riffles and rock, even if they do show up there, they're not likely to be real abundant. But anywhere they've got that swamp-like habitat, they thrive. So I would imagine we see them eventually all the way down the East Coast.
Embry Dam was a large impoundment on the Rappahannock River at Fredericksburg, basically just above the fall line. And that dam came out about 15 years ago. And, look at the Conowingo fish lift, on the Susquehanna in the upper part of the bay. They shut that lift down for moving shad and herring up because they were worried about moving snakeheads up. And I said, they already have snakeheads up there. I said, it's not going to make that much difference. And like you said, I live in the very upper end of the Rappahannock watershed. I'm almost living where trout water is. And every spring, some snakeheads are going to show up in a little town near where I live. And it causes all kinds of excitement and fear. The snakeheads are here now. They're way up in this beautiful, brook in the mountains. But like you said, they get up there and they don't like it. There's something inside them telling them to go upstream to create new colonies or find new habitat or whatever, but they get up there and they're like, this sucks. It's hard to make a living up here, and they're gone. They're there for a week or two, and if nobody catches them, they're all disappear. So like you said, you can look at with like a lot of stuff like flatheads and their preferred habitat or blue catfish. One does well below the fall line, one does better above the fall line. And other than that, we don't see much of an impact. But it's the same with snakes. Like you said, if the habitat's there, they're probably gonna hang out. But if the habitat's not there, they're gone.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening to Fish University. Do you have a question or a topic for the podcast? If so, you can email me at Wes, that's WES, .Neal, that's NEAL, at Mississippi State, that's MSSTATE.edu. Or instead, please visit the Fish University Facebook page. On the Facebook page, you will find useful articles, videos, stories, and other information, as well as updates on upcoming podcasts. Not to mention, you can send me a private message with questions or suggestions. Just search Fish University and look for our colorful logo. And please follow the Fish University page. We need your support. Now back to the show. Do you want to talk at all about what's going on in Florida?
Other than that paper that Nico published a year or two ago about finding the gold line in the Gulf Coast, that was news to me. And it was also interesting that they basically, I didn't know about the genetic work that had been done by Adamsman and Brits, I guess, in 2019 on reclassifying what, we'd all thought as what, even through the Snakehead Symposium when Amy Benson, Amy did a lot of the classification work for USGS, Fish and Wildlife Service. But yeah, so, she's probably aware of this at this point, but the reclassification of the bullseye to be a gold line was interesting in that, the genetics matched up better for that fish down there. And it's sort of been, they called it like a group of fish, the genre was so close, the group of species within that genre that they just basically call it the Mariulis group. So it's just, they've got that oscillation, that like a red drum spot near the tail. They're not going to get up into the north too far because of the thermal tolerances. Even if we do have some warming, I just don't see those fish moving that far north. So we're pretty much dealing with Argus. The northern is our fish that we'll be dealing with, from here out.
Maybe you'll have to start developing hatcheries and stocking them out for these anglers to catch, right? So. So, John, we've been talking about their distribution and some of the impacts, but the way that snakeheads will have impacts a lot of times is through their diet, either through competition or through direct direct predation on other species. So, what have you guys learned about their life history and their diet?
Well, the biggest still unknown to life history is the spawning sequence. The literature all says multiple spawn, multiple spawn, multiple spawn, and then here or there you might see several times a year. I've even seen up to 5 times a year. I don't know what that was based on, but that's the one thing we haven't really nailed down completely yet. We've nailed a lot of stuff down, but that's one that we haven't. Our best guess is now, based on looking at the ovary status or the fullness of the ovaries through what we call a GSI, a gonad-somatic index, over the whole course of the year, is that we have this huge peak in early June. And then we've caught fry out there and we've seen fry. So we know and we've done back calculations with young fish, daily rings on their otoliths. So we know that they're spawning primarily in early June. That's their big peak. But there's a secondary peak. There's no questions, because typically if you look at the size structure of a year class, you have this bimodal length distribution. We have 2 peaks. And so we think that there's a secondary spawn that occurs in maybe like around early September. That's what we haven't nailed down yet. And the other thing we haven't nailed down completely is why the female snakeheads are extraordinarily fecund. In other words, they have a lot of eggs in their ovaries, a lot of ova. When I say lots, I'm talking tens of thousands. And then when you look at them, count them, subsample them, they all look the same. They're the same shape, the same size, the same color. But when we find schools of fry, young fry, maybe 2-day-old, 3-day-old fry, we usually only find groups in hundreds. And then if we take a snakehead, recently spawned female, and we examine her ovaries, she's spent. I mean, there's nothing else left in there. So one of the things, and I had some folks from Missouri State working on this, Quentin Phelps and Hay Kim. They were with West Virginia, and then they moved. So it's odd to have Missouri State people working on the tidal Potomac. But anyway, that's how it worked out. But they were looking at some of this early life history stuff, and they did some looking at some spawn, some timing, some food habits, because nobody's looked at food habits. They switched to piscivorous very early, as you would expect. But we still don't understand fully why we're not seeing larger fry balls with parents guarding, because there's a high degree of parental care. You have a nest building strategy, you have a guarding strategy of both parents through even fingerling stage, which in the fish world, especially of a predator, like is not very common. So that's one side of the life history thing that we're still scratching our heads a little bit about. The thing that we know a lot about is the dietary, the food habits. This is the totally opportunistic feeder. Anglers always ask me, what kind of bait should I use? I said, it has to be weedless, because you're going to be throwing it in grass, because if you're not fishing in grass, you're not going to catch any snakeheads. And then number 2, it doesn't really matter. A frog, a senko, a fluke, a chatterbait, whatever. It doesn't matter, because if the fish is hungry, it's going to hit it if it's not spooked. They're hard to sight fish because they're spooky. Typically, you want to fish the habitat, not the fish, although you can sight fish them. But based on looking at thousands and thousands of stomachs, the number one food item in the tidal Potomac system is this little fish called a banded killifish, a fungulus, a little minnow. It's about the size. They call them bull minnows. They use them for flounder bait in a lot of estuaries. Their habitat can vary quite a bit, but typically they're estuarine fish from freshwater to some brackish water. Their adult size is the size of your pinky finger. And snakeheads love them, I think, because they're in their habitat. They're a soft-rayed fish, although they don't really seem to care about spines. But when we look at the frequency of occurrence, in other words, how many snakeheads are eating banded killifish, that's the highest. Banded killifish come in number 1 for the top food item consumed. We're not measuring banded killifish abundance on the tidal Potomac system, but our researchers at George Mason University are, and they've got net trawls of at least 50 years of data on juvenile fish and small fish abundance in Gunston Cove, which is one of the coves where we do our monitoring. And so I was able to leverage some of their data. And in fact, their data suggested that the banded killifish population has increased since snakeheads have shown up. So if that's their number 1 food item, and it's going up. Now, maybe it's going up because that's some response to being eaten. Okay, that's possible, but the numbers aren't declining because of snakeheads. So we got that one locked up. The other number 1 food item is bluegill, or a like type Lepomis centrarchid. Lepomis is a genre of centrarchid, the sunfish. They're those round sunfish, like bluegill, like pumpkin seeds, like redbreast or red ear, or there's a bunch more of them, greens. And I think, again, it's a habitat thing. where do you find banded killifish? Where do you find pumpkin seeds or bluegill? Very shallow, heavily vegetated water along the edges, of shoreline edges. That's where snakeheads hang out. So I think it's just a function of habitat is why we see what they eat. So you say, okay, so what's happening? Well, number one, bluegills are not native to all our waters anyway. If you get the Snakehead Symposium, if you like snakeheads, you can get the book, and in the back of the book, there's a transcribed discussion from this interaction we had at the meeting where I got in an argument with somebody about the value of snakehead, the cost benefit analysis of, if you will, of snakeheads eating non-native bluegill. It's pretty funny. But other than that, we did another study that's in that book because now we have snakeheads in lakes because people illegally stock them in lakes. And so essentially I've got snakeheads in all the waters that I'm responsible for in my district. I didn't put them there. Our lovely anglers put them there. But what they did was they created outdoor laboratories for us inadvertently, which we've taken advantage of. And so, because we own some of the lakes where the snakeheads have been established, they're literally public fishing lakes that were built by our agency just for fishing. And so we have, as you can imagine, copious data on fish populations in these lakes for many years. So if you have a treatment effect, like a snakehead showing up at point A, it's pretty easy to go back and evaluate, well, did the bluegill population change after point A? And we can say no. And we publish that work as well. So I think, again, it comes back to the absolute abundance thing. If the numbers of snakeheads in that lake or in that river kept going the way they were going in 2007 and 2008 and 2009 at that trajectory, and then they hadn't peaked out at a relatively low level compared to another predator in that same niche like largemouth bass, then I think we might have had a problem. We might have been in a situation where you have competition. But it looks like what the situation that we have is just dietary overlap, because to have true competition, there has to be a limitation on that forage base, right? And so I would argue that we're not having any limitation on the forage base simply because snakehead numbers haven't been that high. If we're out there on the river and we're doing a bass sample, we're catching anywhere from 75 to 100 bass an hour, electrofishing catch rate for relative abundance. That same system, usually the snakehead catch rates are going to be in the single digits. So if based on recruitment and your class strength, if your bass population is floating around between 75 and 150 bass an hour, and you throw even 10 more snakeheads a year into that mix, in a fish factory like the Potomac River, or even the Rappahannock River, or the Lake Brittle or Lake Burke, it doesn't matter. It's a wash. There's no effect. Now, like I said, if the snakehead numbers kept going up, yeah, I mean, at some point something's got to give. But we haven't seen that yet. I'm not saying it can't happen, but I don't think it will.
John, is there anything else you want the listeners to know about the species and their presence here in the U.S.?
Don't move fish. Please don't move fish. Buy a fishing license and don't move fish. If you catch a snakehead, take it home and eat it because it's really, really good. It took my wife about 2 years to start eating them because she thought they were ugly and they were slimy. They are slimy. I've cleaned a lot of snakeheads, and yeah, you get slimy. But what happened was all my friends and family would always come over to the house when I cooked snakeheads, and everybody would always rave about how good they were. And my wife Sharon would always kind of like at some point, I think she thought she was missing out on something. So she finally tried them one day, and she really liked them. So now she even has her own favorite recipe that I got from somebody that contacted me online about, I was on a couple shows a long time ago featuring snakeheads, and I got some mostly positive feedback from some of that stuff. And a guy sent me a Thai recipe that I still use to this day, where you steam them with some sesame oil and soy sauce, and shave some fresh scallions and ginger on there, and some chili peppers, and serve that over rice. And it's you can use a little coconut milk too. It comes out real nice.
Sounds delicious. Well, John, thanks so much for coming on today. Really enjoyed this. This has been enlightening. I've always thought the snakehead situation on the East Coast was fascinating, and it's nice to hear how it's not nearly as scary as some of our media made it out to be, and not necessarily as disastrous as some of the early models suggested.
Right.
And it is a little bit sad that they're becoming such a popular fish that may be impossible to get rid of them. But, most of what we fish for today is probably not native to that area. So
right.
Whether we're talking about your largemouth or smallmouth on the East Coast, or striped bass in reservoirs, I mean, these fish aren't supposed to be there naturally. The reservoirs aren't even supposed to be there for that matter. But thank you so much for coming on. I think we've learned a lot. Glad to have you here, and maybe we'll talk to you again in the future.
Thanks for the opportunity, Wes. It was good to see you, and hopefully I'll see you at Chattanooga at the Southern Division meeting.
I'll be there. So we'll see you there. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in to Fish University. We'll see you next time. Fish University is hosted by Wes Neal, an employee of Mississippi State University Extension Service and a faculty member in the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Aquaculture. This podcast is part of the Natural Resources University network of podcasts. Funding was provided by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. If you have questions or suggestions, please go to the Extension website at extension.mississippistate.edu. Click on Natural Resources and then select the Fisheries tab in the drop-down menu. Or you can email me at wes.neal@msstate.edu.